but it's you I like. Every
So if you
part
had like
of you,
50 lives to live, you'd eventually
your
get it right,
skin,
wouldn't you?
I mean,
your
you would hope so,
eyes,
right?
Right.
your
Think about it for a second. It's
feelings,
basically the
whether
ultimate cosmic
old
safety net.
or
A
new.
universe where every catastrophic failure or missed opportunity or broken relationship isn't a permanent tragedy.
It's just a rough draft.
Exactly. You just get to hit continue, respawn, and try again. And honestly, for anyone listening, you know that feels incredibly comforting.
Absolutely.
But the question we are diving into today is, what if that exact safety net, that promise that you can be anyone and try everything over and over, is quietly erasing the only version of you that actually matters?
And that tension, that exact question, is what we are pulling apart in today's deep dive. We are looking at a really fascinating source document titled, "It's You I Like, Reincarnation and the Restoration."
Yeah, and it's a brilliant text.
It really is. It's essentially a comprehensive, almost forensic theological response to a presenter named Will.
Who I think goes by Latter-day Chad in some online spaces, right?
Right, exactly. And Will has been making this very specific, very compelling argument online. He's attempting to merge the ancient concept of reincarnation with Latter-day Saint theology.
Which we'll just be referring to as restoration theology for the sake of this deep dive.
Right. And just to set the ground rules here, we are examining the source document's breakdown of this debate with total impartiality.
Completely. We aren't here to declare a winner or take sides on any of the theological claims.
Exactly. We are just here to look at the mechanics of these two massive ideas based on the source text, because Will's underlying premise, the one he starts with, is something that resonates universally.
I mean, is one life really enough? I look at my own life, and 70 or 80 years feels like a terrifyingly short window to figure out anything of eternal significance.
Let alone achieve some kind of divine perfection.
Right. I mean, we spend the first 20 years just trying to understand how our own brains work.
And then another 40 caught up in the absolute chaos of, surviving, paying bills, raising families.
Yeah, and by the time we actually possess a shred of real wisdom, our bodies just start shutting down. So if the goal is ultimate progression, a single human lifespan seems like a huge design flaw.
It really does. And the source document we're looking at today validates that feeling immediately. It doesn't just dismiss Will's premise out of hand.
Which is smart because the anxiety is real.
Exactly. The document acknowledges that reincarnation answers that specific anxiety perfectly. I mean, it promises infinite horizons.
It's an elegant system.
Yeah, it's a cyclical mechanism designed to ensure that nobody is permanently damned or limited by the constraints of just one brief, incredibly disadvantaged mortal life.
All right, going back to the video game analogy, if you were playing something notoriously unforgiving, a permanent game over after one single slip-up just feels cruel.
It feels arbitrary.
Yeah, so extra lives feel like mercy.
They do. But the document we are analyzing pivots sharply right here. It asks a really structural question. What problem is reincarnation actually solving?
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so the thesis of the source is that layering reincarnation over restoration theology doesn't actually expand the existing framework.
Wait, it doesn't?
No, the source argues it completely overwrites it. It attempts to fix a problem that, within the original theology, is actually already solved by a completely different mechanism.
Okay, so to understand how that works, we probably can't start by looking at timelines or karma, right?
Right. We have to go down to the absolute bedrock. The document points out that we have a fundamental disagreement about the very nature of being.
We basically have to define what a person actually is.
Exactly.
Which, sounds like a simple question. But when you look at reincarnation, it requires a very specific definition of identity.
It does.
It requires identity to be totally modular.
Modular and flexible. The source explains that reincarnation fundamentally operates on dualism. So the you is the invisible, eternal spirit.
And the body is just an accessory.
Basically, yeah. The body you inhabit, whether you are, say, a 14th century peasant or a modern-day accountant or an ancient king, is just a vehicle. It's a temporary shell.
Like a rental car.
Exactly. You can step into it, drive it around for 80 years, step out of it, and suffer absolute no fundamental loss to your core identity.
I always think of it like changing clothes. Like you come in from the snow, you take off a heavy winter coat, and you put on a t-shirt.
That's a great analogy.
Right, and the clothing drastically changes how you experience the environment, obviously, and it changes how people perceive you. But the person underneath the fabric is completely unaltered.
Because the coat isn't you.
Exactly.
Well, that is exactly where the source document hits the brakes. It points out that restoration theology operates on a radically different definition of a human being.
Okay, how so?
It actually cites a specific text for this, Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, verse 15, which explicitly states, and I'll just quote it here, "The spirit and the body are the soul of man."
The spirit and the body together.
Together. And the source emphasizes that this isn't just poetic phrasing, It is a literal structural claim about the physics of the eternities.
Okay, so if the spirit and the body together constitute the soul, then the body is definitely not a coat.
Right. It is not a rental car. Leaving a body behind is not a neutral transition.
So if we move away from the coat analogy, it's probably more like baking a cake.
Oh, I like that. Walk me through that.
Well, okay, so you have flour, which is its own distinct thing, and you have sugar, which is also distinct. But the moment you mix them together and apply the intense heat of an oven, a chemical reaction occurs.
You get a cake.
Exactly, you get a cake. If you try to extract the flour back out of the baked cake later, you don't just get flour, you completely destroy the cake.
Right, because the ingredients have formed a permanent, inseparable new union.
Exactly.
And extending that further, the document argues that if mortality is the oven, the heat of physical experience fundamentally alters the spirit.
It changes the actual structure.
Yeah. In this theology, the ultimate destiny of humanity is resurrection, which is defined as the permanent, inseparable fusion of spirit and physical matter.
So the purpose of coming to Earth isn't just to, gain knowledge or gather data.
No, it's to literally become a different kind of entity, a joined entity.
Wow. So if bodies are meant to be temporary shells that you just swap out lifetime after lifetime.
But the entire purpose of gaining a body in the first place is undermined.
Because individuality becomes completely transferable. I mean, if I can be me in 1,000 different bodies, then none of those bodies are actually me.
Exactly. The source asks, why work toward an eternal, inseparable union of body and spirit if the whole system is supposedly designed to treat bodies as disposable?
But wait, let me push back on that for a second. Doesn't restoration theology openly teach that we existed as spirits before we had bodies?
It does, yes.
So if we were conscious individual spirits floating around in some premortal realm without a physical form, doesn't that prove the spirit and the body are fundamentally separate things that can operate independently?
Well, they absolutely operated independently in the past. But the document explains that premortal life was essentially an incomplete state.
Okay.
The theological narrative here is that the spirits reached a plateau. They literally could not progress further without a physical form.
Ah, I see. So while they started as separate, the intended trajectory is their permanent union.
Precisely. And reincarnation reverses that trajectory.
Because it suggests shedding the body is progress.
Right. It suggests that shedding the body and taking a new one is the mechanism of progress, whereas the restoration views shedding the body, which is death, as an unnatural separation. It's viewed as an enemy to be overcome through resurrection.
You know, this philosophical difference sounds incredibly academic at first.
It does.
But then you realize how deeply it impacts the actual human experience. I mean, if the body isn't just a biological accident, if it is permanently fused to your eternal identity, that changes everything about how we relate to each other.
It really does. And the source anchors this with an amazing pop culture reference.
Oh, the Mr. Rogers quote.
Yes. Fred Rogers' famous phrase, "It's you I like."
Which is so perfect for this.
It really is. It grounds this very high-minded ontological debate into something deeply, deeply emotional.
Because human love is breathtakingly specific.
Exactly. When you love your spouse or your child or your best friend, you don't just love some abstract floating orb of spiritual energy, right?
No, you love them. You love the specific way their eyes crinkle when they are trying not to laugh.
Right.
You love the cadence of their voice. You love their actual physical presence in a room.
And the source points out that reincarnation introduces an immense, almost tragic tension into those human relationships.
How so?
Well, it argues that if Will's framework is correct, the version of the person you love right now is just a temporary iteration. They're just a phase.
Oh, wow. Think about the grief of losing someone with that mindset. Imagine standing at a funeral and someone comes up to you and says, "Don't worry, they aren't gone. You will see them again. But next time, they won't look like this. They won't sound like this."
They'll have a totally different face.
Different cultural background, entirely different memories, and a new personality forged by a new upbringing.
That doesn't offer comfort at all.
No, that feels like a total replacement. It feels like the person I actually knew has been erased and a stranger has been handed to me in their place.
The source insists that true reunion requires specificity. Reincarnation makes identity fundamentally unstable. I mean, if your loved one has lived 50 lives, which iteration of them are you actually tied to?
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here.
Sure, go for it.
Isn't it incredibly shallow to base eternal love on a specific physical face or a laugh? Like, shouldn't enlightened divine love be about the pure soul underneath, loving the essence no matter what wrapper it comes in?
And that right there is the exact cultural assumption the source document is trying to dismantle.
Okay, unpack that.
In this specific theology, the physical form is not a shallow wrapper.
Right, because of the flour and sugar thing.
Exactly. Because the body is a core piece of the eternal soul, loving the physical manifestations of that person isn't shallow at all. It's actually an accurate recognition of their divine nature.
You cannot separate the essence from the form without destroying the identity.
Precisely. And the source raises two massive questions for Will's model here. First, when all is said and done, who is actually resurrected?
Oh man, if you've occupied a dozen distinct physical bodies, which one gets to be eternal?
Right. It creates a total logistical nightmare.
And what's the second question?
Second, which version of that person is loved eternally? If identity is constantly shifting, true eternal connection becomes impossible because the target is always moving.
That makes total sense. So if we accept this premise that identity is singular, permanent, and inherently tied to this specific body, we are immediately forced back into the corner we started in.
The time problem.
The time problem. If this specific, flawed, bumbling version of me is the only shot I get, how is 80 years enough time to achieve anything resembling perfection?
Well, the document attacks this assumption head-on. It argues that Will's anxiety over limited time is actually based on a massive structural misconception of the restoration timeline.
Okay, a misconception. How so?
It says that the idea that one life isn't enough is only a valid complaint if you believe mortality is doing all the heavy lifting.
Right, if mortality is the entirety of the testing ground, if that's the only place you can learn.
Correct. But the restoration framework, as the document outlines it, is astronomically larger than that.
Okay, map it out for us.
The source lays out a continuous linear progression. It starts with eons of premortal learning and development,
Okay.
followed by a brief, highly concentrated mortal experience.
The 80 years?
Right. And then that is followed by a vast postmortal progression in the spirit world, culminating in a resurrection and a 1,000-year period called the millennium, where even further refining occurs.
Okay, I see the contrast now. Reincarnation looks at mortality, sees that it's way too short to learn everything, and decides the solution is to loop it.
Exactly. It solves the time problem by repeating the same phase.
Whereas the restoration solves the time problem by expanding the timeline linearly.
Right. Mortality isn't meant to teach you everything. The document argues it's meant to teach you very specific things that only a mortal environment can provide.
Like what?
Like how to navigate faith through a veil of forgetfulness, and literally just how to operate physical matter.
It's basically the difference between being held back in school and moving on to higher education.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like reincarnation is like realizing you didn't perfectly master third grade math, so you are forced to repeat the third grade over and over.
Right, you take the same tests, sit in the same desks.
Until you get a perfect 100%.
Yeah.
But the timeline the source describes is more like realizing you made mistakes in middle school, but instead of repeating the grade, you carry those flaws and half-learned lessons into high school.
And then into university.
Exactly. The environment changes. The demands change. You don't need to go back and perfectly master being a mortal peasant to eventually learn the lessons of a post-mortal spirit.
Right. The time is built into the system. It's just distributed forward, not backward.
Which leads us perfectly into the mechanics of how a soul actually changes across that time. Because it's not just about running out the clock, right?
Not at all. We are looking at a fundamental clash of theological engines here.
Engines.
Yeah, we have the engine of iteration and the engine of grace.
Okay, this is where the philosophical differences get real consequences. How do you actually achieve salvation in these two models?
Well, the source explains that reincarnation relies almost entirely on an engine of iteration. It's a model of repetition.
So you live, you make choices, you experience the consequences of those choices, you fail, you return, and you try again.
Exactly. It is a sheer accumulation of experience. The idea is that given enough time and enough cycles, you will eventually burn away your ignorance and refine yourself into perfection.
It's a completely self-correcting system. The heavy lifting is entirely on the individual. You fix yourself.
Precisely. But the gospel framework, as articulated in the source, places the burden of transformation entirely elsewhere.
Where does it place it?
It places it on divine grace, specifically through a Redeemer.
Okay.
In this view, weakness isn't transformed by grinding through 1,000 lifetimes of trial and error. It is transformed across eternity by being made new through a divine mediator.
Let me stop you there, though, because I can totally hear someone arguing that these two aren't mutually exclusive.
Okay, what's the argument?
Couldn't the repetition basically be the grace? Like, couldn't God's divine mercy simply be the fact that he gives you a second, third, and 1,000th chance in a new body?
It's a fair question, but the source draws a very hard boundary line against that idea.
Why?
Because given enough time, you can fix yourself is structurally inherently opposed to given enough grace, you can be made new.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. If the mechanism of your salvation is your own accumulated experience across multiple lives, then what exactly is the Redeemer redeeming?
Right. If you can just iterate your way to perfection, a savior becomes obsolete.
Exactly. Grace is reduced to nothing more than a reset button on the cosmic simulation.
It turns Christ from a transformative savior into a cosmic referee who just keeps putting time back on the clock.
That's a perfect way to put it. The restoration insists that human nature itself is flawed and cannot be perfected merely by gaining more experience.
It requires an actual change of nature.
Yes, a fundamental divine transformation, a change of heart, a cleansing that time alone just cannot achieve.
Okay, so we've laid down massive philosophical differences here. We've defined the body, we've mapped the timeline, we've looked at the engine of salvation.
Right.
But the source document then takes a hard pivot into actual scriptural forensics.
It does, because Will Latter-day Chad isn't just pulling reincarnation out of thin air.
No, he is using specific biblical and Latter-day Saint scriptures to argue his case.
And the document systematically dismantles those interpretations one by one.
So let's look at that forensics section, because it is rigorous.
It really is. Will leans heavily into an apparent paradox surrounding Elijah and John the Baptist.
Okay, break that down for us.
He argues that John the Baptist is literally the reincarnated soul of the ancient prophet Elijah. And he anchors this in the New Testament words of Jesus Christ himself.
Right, because Jesus literally says, referring to John the Baptist, that Elias, which is the Greek form of Elijah, has already come.
Yes.
And honestly, if you read that one verse in a total vacuum, it genuinely looks like Jesus is confirming reincarnation.
It really does.
Yeah.
But the source pulls back to look at the broader biblical narrative and points out a devastating contradiction.
That's the contradiction.
Later in the New Testament, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to the Mount of Transfiguration.
Okay.
And while they are there, heavenly beings appear to them. Who appears? Moses and Elijah.
And Elijah appears as Elijah.
Right. And John the Baptist has, by this point in the timeline, already been beheaded by King Herod.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the source asks, if John the Baptist was Elijah reincarnated in a new body, who exactly is standing on the mountain? Is it John's disembodied spirit manifesting as his previous identity? Does he just switch back and forth?
The document argues that Will's model creates an impossible chaotic paradox.
Exactly.
It's like an actor playing two roles in the same play, and the script suddenly calls for both characters to be on stage talking to each other at the exact same time.
That's exactly the logistical problem. And the restoration has a completely different explanation for what Jesus meant that avoids the paradox entirely.
Which is?
It's about shared authority. The source explains that Elias functions not just as a proper name, but as a title. A preparer of the way.
So the relationship between Elijah and John isn't a shared soul, it is a shared mission.
Exactly.
It's a corporate job title.
Basically, yeah.
Will is saying it's one person with two names. The document says it's two entirely distinct individuals who hold the exact same managerial title, director of preparation, at different points in history.
Right. So when Jesus says Elijah has come, he is telling the people the function of Elijah, the prophetic role they were waiting for, was fulfilled by John.
Which perfectly preserves the distinct identities of both men while completely fulfilling the prophecy.
Exactly. It resolves the paradox. The source then turns its attention to a text unique to Latter-day Saint theology, the Book of Abraham.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah, Will points to chapter 3, which describes a first estate and a second estate.
And Will reads first and second and interprets that as loops, like estate 1, estate 2, estate 3, multiple mortal lives.
Right. But the source counters this by examining the actual structure of the text in Abraham.
And what does it find?
It demonstrates that the text is strictly sequential. It describes spirits keeping their first estate, which is the premortal life, and being added upon by entering a second estate, which is mortal life.
So there is absolutely no textual evidence of a cycle.
Zero. The methodology the source highlights here is fascinating. It points out that to extract reincarnation from these verses, you have to actively smuggle outside ideas into the text.
You have to take a narrative that is explicitly drawn as a straight line, grab the ends, and physically force it into a circle.
Right. You are projecting a framework onto the text rather than extracting meaning from it.
Okay, so that's the first part of the scriptural forensics. What's next?
The document continues this analysis by diving into the concepts of justice, consequence, and karma, particularly using the Book of Mormon.
Okay, where does it go in the Book of Mormon?
It looks really closely at Alma chapter 41, which details the law of restoration.
Right, so Alma teaches that in the resurrection, everything is restored to its proper frame. Every limb, every hair, but also every desire and attribute. You essentially get back what you sent out.
Exactly. And the source poses a brilliant logistical challenge here. The law of restoration relies absolutely on the continuity of identity.
Okay, explain that.
Well, if a soul has occupied 50 different bodies across 50 different lifetimes, what exactly is being restored?
Oh, right. If I was a deeply spiritual monk in the 12th century, and then a ruthless pirate in the 17th century, and a quiet accountant today, which frame is the proper one?
Exactly. Which desires are restored to you?
Reincarnation completely dissolves the mechanics of the resurrection into total chaos.
It breaks the system entirely.
Wow. Okay. What else does the source look at?
It pulls from the New Testament next, specifically John chapter 9, to show how Christ handled the underlying philosophy of karma.
Oh, this is the famous story of the man born blind.
Yes. So the disciples see this man, who has been blind since birth, and they ask Jesus, who sinned this man or his parents that he was born blind?
And the premise of their question is pure karma.
Pure karma. They are assuming that a physical disability in this life must be a direct penalty for a moral failure.
And since he was born with it, the sin must have happened before he was born. You know, it proves that the cultural ether was totally full of these ideas at the time. The disciples were wrestling with the exact same questions Will is.
They absolutely were.
So why wouldn't Christ, right in that moment, validate reincarnation? I mean, if past life consequences are real, this was the ultimate teaching moment.
But Christ's response is an absolute rejection of the premise.
What does he say?
He doesn't say, yes, he made some poor choices in a past life and is currently balancing his cosmic scales. He says, neither.
Neither this man sinned nor his parents.
Right. The source emphasizes that Christ fundamentally reframes human suffering here. He moves it completely away from a system of karmic punishment and into an opportunity for the works of God to be made manifest.
But you know, if the universe doesn't operate on karma, if we aren't personally balancing our own ledgers over millions of years, we have to ask how the system ensures justice.
That's the natural next question.
Because reincarnation feels incredibly fair on paper. Everyone eventually gets what they deserve.
It feels fair until you look at the psychological reality of it. The source actually uncovers a massive, devastating hidden cost to karmic justice.
Really? What is it?
Think about a person suffering immense tragedy in this life. Under a reincarnation framework, that suffering might be tied to a sin they committed in a past life.
Okay.
But they have absolutely no memory of that past life.
Oh. So they are being punished for a crime they don't remember committing by a version of themselves they don't even recognize.
Exactly. It makes the suffering entirely abstract. It divorces accountability from conscious reality.
It turns justice into just arbitrary punishment.
Right.
It's like waking up in a prison cell with no memory of a trial, no memory of a crime, and the guard just shrugs and says, you deserve to be here, trust me. You can't learn from that, you just suffer.
And the document contrasts this hollow justice with the restoration's view of justice through Christ.
Which is much more direct.
Very direct. In this theology, the specific unfair losses you suffer in this specific life are directly restored and consecrated for your benefit.
You aren't forced to repeat life until you stop suffering. Your current suffering is redeemed.
Precisely. And to illustrate this, the document analyzes Will's use of Jacob's ladder.
Okay, from the Old Testament.
Right. Jacob dreams of a ladder reaching to heaven with angels ascending and descending. Will interprets this ascending and descending as the cyclical flow of souls.
Like going up to the spirit world, coming back down to be reincarnated.
Exactly, a cycle.
But think about the architecture of a ladder. You do not build a ladder to go in circles.
Exactly. A ladder implies linear vertical progression.
So what does the ladder represent in the restoration context?
The source says the ladder represents covenants and ordinances, actual steps taken upward toward God.
And the angels.
The angels descending are not returning souls heading for the delivery room. They are divine messengers sent downward to assist humanity in their upward climb.
That makes so much more sense, because if reincarnation is true, Jacob's ladder isn't a ladder, it's a cosmic treadmill.
A treadmill, yes.
You are sweating, you are enduring immense pain, you are putting in monumental effort lifetime after lifetime, but you are literally just looping in place.
Right. But the restoration keeps the ladder as an actual ladder. You climb, you reach the destination, and you get off the ladder.
And the source reinforces this destination concept with the book of Revelation, right?
Yes. Revelation promises that those who overcome will go no more out of God's temple.
Which Will might interpret as finally breaking free of the karmic wheel of rebirth.
Right. But the document argues that go no more out is a promise of permanence.
Meaning what?
Meaning an absolute end to separation from God and from your resurrected body. You aren't escaping a wheel. You've simply arrived home.
It is a profound shift in how you view your own existence. I mean, if your trials are just karmic echoes of forgotten past lives, your current life lacks ultimate meaning.
It really does.
But if your redemption is tied directly to the highly specific, unique trials of this life, your current existence is infinitely meaningful.
Exactly.
Okay, but we have to address the elephant in the room here.
Let's do it.
What about the memories?
Yes.
Because Will and many others point to the phenomenon of past life memories as empirical proof. We've all heard the stories of, like, a 4-year-old who suddenly knows the names of a World War II bomber crew, or someone under hypnosis recalling vivid details of life in 18th century France.
The document absolutely tackles the phenomenon of memory. It doesn't just ignore it or brush it aside.
How does it handle it?
It systematically breaks the memory argument down into 4 distinct categories, and it identifies logical and structural flaws in each one.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, it addresses what it calls premortal familiarity.
Oh, like that haunting sense of déjà vu.
Right, or meeting someone and feeling with absolute certainty that you have known them for thousands of years, or just an innate sense that you existed before you were born.
Does the source deny that feeling?
Not at all.
Oh.
In fact, restoration theology demands it. You did exist before you were born.
Right.
But the document points out a critical logical leap that people make here. Feeling a sense of premortal spiritual existence is not proof of a past mortal identity.
Oh, I see.
Recognizing an ancient spiritual bond does not mean you and your friend were cobblers together in medieval London.
You were remembering your first estate, not a previous second estate. That actually makes total sense.
Exactly. The second point it hits is reconstructive memory.
Okay, bringing in cognitive science.
Yes. It points out that human memory is not a fixed objective video recording that we just play back. Our brains are narrative-building machines.
Memory is highly malleable.
Highly malleable and reconstructive. So the source suggests that many past life regressions, especially those done under hypnosis, are just instances of the brain stitching together a coherent narrative out of disparate historical facts, subconscious desires, and pure imagination.
Because the brain abhors a vacuum. If you ask it to find a past life, it will build one for you out of a movie you saw when you were 7.
Exactly. But then the source introduces what it considers the fatal flaw of the reincarnation model within this theology.
And what is that?
It calls it the veil problem.
The veil problem. Okay, lay that out for us.
In Latter-day Saint theology, a veil of forgetfulness is placed over the minds of all individuals at birth.
Right, so we don't remember the premortal life.
Correct. And the purpose is to allow us to walk by faith and make untethered moral choices. But if Will attempts to merge reincarnation with a theology that includes this veil, the logic collapses entirely.
Why?
Well, think about it. If the entire mechanism of reincarnation is designed to help you learn from the mistakes of your past lives, why on earth would God implement a mechanism that entirely blocks you from remembering what those mistakes were?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it creates an unresolvable contradiction.
A lesson you cannot access cannot consciously shape you.
Reincarnation requires repeated experience for the explicit purpose of moral correction. But you cannot consciously repent of a sin you don't even know you committed. Yeah. I'm going to push back here again, or at least play devil's advocate for Will.
Go ahead.
Isn't it possible that the subconscious mind retains the lesson, even if the conscious mind forgets the details?
Give me an example.
Like, think about a toddler touching a hot stove. The toddler grows up and has absolutely no conscious memory of the specific Tuesday when they burned their hand,
Right.
but they retain a deep subconscious aversion to touching hot metal. Couldn't karmic learning work exactly like that beneath the veil?
It's a compelling counter-argument, but the source document maintains a very sharp distinction here between behavioral conditioning and moral agency.
Okay, what's the difference?
A subconscious aversion to a hot stove is a biological survival instinct. It is not a moral choice.
Ah,
Spiritual progression in the restoration framework requires conscious agency. It requires you to look at your flaws, understand them, and deliberately choose to turn away from them through the atonement.
you can't deeply spiritually repent of something on autopilot.
Exactly. A system that relies on subconscious conditioning bypasses the very moral agency that mortality is designed to test.
The gospel framework demands conscious interaction with your own brokenness, which fundamentally requires memory of your own actions.
Precisely.
That distinction between instinct and moral choice is incredibly sharp.
It is, and it leads directly to the fourth part of the memory argument, which the source calls the ego pattern.
The ego pattern, what is that?
The document observes a massive statistical anomaly in past life memory claims.
Okay.
When people recall past lives, they overwhelmingly remember being significant historical figures.
Oh, right. They were royalty, they were famous generals, they were tragic heroines.
Everyone was Cleopatra.
Nobody remembers being the peasant who died of dysentery at age 12 after a life of shoveling mud.
Right. Historically, 99% of human existence has been incredibly mundane, brutal, and anonymous.
So the fact that past life regressions so heavily favor dramatic, significant identities points strongly towards psychological projection.
Projection and ego fulfillment, rather than authentic historical recall.
Okay, so if the logic of reincarnation breaks down under scriptural scrutiny, and if it contradicts the definition of the soul, and if the memory arguments are deeply flawed,
Yes.
why did anyone in the early church ever entertain the idea in the first place? Because Will is quick to point out that some early members and figures did explore concepts resembling reincarnation.
He is, and the document has to address that history.
And does it?
It does. It addresses the historical context directly. It acknowledges that the early days of the Restoration were a period of massive, explosive theological exploration.
The heavens were open, new ideas were pouring in.
Exactly. And early members were trying to synthesize these radical new revelations with existing philosophies. So ideas like reincarnation were discussed.
Okay.
But the document draws a vital distinction. Exploration is not doctrine.
Right. Just because a 19th century church leader pondered an idea in a journal or a private meeting doesn't mean it is the structural truth of the religion.
Exactly. The source argues that truth in the Restoration doesn't emerge fully formed and flawless on day one.
Right.
It settles over time.
It is refined through ongoing prophetic consensus.
Right, not through the unearthing of hidden, suppressed secrets.
You know, Will's argument seems to lean heavily on the idea of personal revelation. He seems to frame his belief in reincarnation as following a higher hidden truth that he has personally discovered, even if it goes against the grain of the established modern church structure.
The document absolutely addresses that tension. The tension between personal revelation and structural authority.
And what does it say?
It affirms that personal revelation is the lifeblood of the faith. It's essential. But it argues that personal revelation must operate within prophetic structure.
It makes me think of the scientific method, honestly.
How so?
Well, personal revelation is like making an incredible, groundbreaking observation in your own private lab. It's vital. You need that. But prophetic structure is the peer review process. If you take your private observation and declare it a universal law of physics without running it through the peer review of the established structure, you aren't really doing science anymore.
You are just drifting into subjectivity.
Exactly. The structure prevents you from turning a personal anomaly or a misinterpretation into a universal doctrine. Or, to use a different analogy, it's like a boat. Personal revelation without prophetic structure is a boat with a powerful sail but absolutely no rudder.
You'll definitely move fast.
But you'll just drift wherever the wind takes you.
That is exactly the dynamic the source is highlighting. Without the anchor of prophetic structure, interpretation drifts indefinitely.
Right.
And this brings the document to its final, ultimate trade-off. The ultimate choice between two distinct systems,
Which are?
expansion versus identity.
Okay, let's break that down. Reincarnation obviously offers the ultimate expansion.
It does. It promises that you are not limited by this one small life. You can be everyone.
You can experience the universe from the perspective of every gender, every race, every socioeconomic status, and every era of history.
But the document reiterates the devastating cost of that expansion.
The cost to identity.
Right. If you have the capacity to be everyone, then ultimately you are no one in particular. Your identity is just a blur.
You lose your specificity.
And the restoration, as articulated in the source, insists that you are a specific being.
Your specific spirit, permanently fused to your specific body, creates an entirely unique, singular identity.
And that specificity is the only thing that makes profound love possible. It is the only thing that makes resurrection coherent.
And it is the only thing that makes exaltation meaningful.
Exactly.
Which brings us full circle to the very first question we asked at the beginning of the deep dive. Is one life enough?
The core takeaway from the source document is a resounding yes, but it requires a massive shift in perspective.
It requires trust in a completed plan.
Yes. Reincarnation looks at the brevity and the pain of human life and says, we need more. We need more time, more bodies, more chances, more experiences.
But the restoration says what has been given is enough.
When you zoom out to the eternal timeline, you have enough time. You have enough avenues for postmortal growth.
You have enough grace through the atonement of Jesus Christ to completely cover the gaps in your mortal performance.
And most importantly, you have enough identity right now.
I really want to end on the final synthesis the source makes because it is incredibly powerful.
It is.
It states that the you sitting here right now listening to this deep dive, not a recycled version of you from ancient Rome.
Not some future upgraded replacement version of you with a different face and different memories.
Just you. That specific version is the exact one intended for exaltation.
Having only one body, living only one mortal life is not a limitation. According to this theology, it is the deliberate, magnificent design.
Think about your own life right now. Think about the anxiety you carry, the physical pain you might be dealing with, or the regrets that keep you up at night.
If reincarnation is true, maybe you deserve those things because of a forgotten past.
But if the restoration is true, those specific struggles are the exact refining fire meant for your specific soul.
Right.
So we want to leave you with a final thought to carry with you today.
Something to mull over.
Yeah. If this specific flawed version of you, with your exact, sometimes annoying quirks, the specific face you see in the mirror every morning, your unique, messy memories, and yes, your precise, sometimes painful mistakes, if that is the ultimate draft intended for eternity, rather than just a rough sketch on a whiteboard waiting to be erased and restarted in the next life, how does that change the grace and the patience you show yourself today?
It demands that we treat our current, messy lives with profound reverence.
It absolutely does. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into It's You I Like, Reincarnation and the Restoration.
But it's you I like. Every part of you. Your skin, your eyes, your feelings, whether old or new. I hope that you'll remember, even when you're feeling blue, that it's you I like, it's you yourself, it's you I like.